The air inside the packed graduation hall pulsed with pride and expectation. Families fanned themselves with glossy programs, the scent of polished wood and fresh flowers lingering beneath the bright lights. Among the sea of beaming parents sat Marcus Hale, a decorated Marine whose quiet strength drew admiring glances even when he wasn't in uniform. His eyes, sharp, disciplined, yet soft with a father's love, never left the stage where his teenage son would soon receive a diploma. But pride has a way of drawing unwanted attention. Two security guards, stiff in their pressed jackets, began a slow, deliberate walk toward Marcus. At first, it seemed like routine crowd control, until their eyes locked on him and him alone. Their whispers carried a chill that cut through the warm hum of celebration. One guard gestured curtly toward the exit, his face set in the kind of forced politeness that hides something uglier. Parents nearby shifted uneasily, sensing a wrong they couldn't yet name. Marcus stayed seated, his jaw tight, heart pounding with the instincts of a soldier who had faced battlefields, but never expected hostility in a school auditorium. The ceremony hadn't even begun, yet the tension in the room already threatened to erupt. For Marcus Hale, this day was supposed to be more than a ceremony. It was a milestone carved out of years of sacrifice. He had missed birthdays and holidays while serving overseas, trading warm embraces for the cold grind of deployments. Every letter from home, every scratchy video call, every photograph tucked into a rucksack was a promise to himself that his absence would one day mean a brighter future for his only son, Jordan. Watching Jordan cross the stage in cap and gown was the reward Marcus had clung to during sleepless nights on distant bases. The high school auditorium reflected the pride of an entire community. Banners in the school's blue and silver colors hung from the rafters, while the graduates sat in perfect rows of black robes, their tassels trembling with nervous excitement. Families filled every seat, spilling into the aisles in a jubilant overflow. Marcus had arrived early to secure a perfect view, his chest swelling when he spotted Jordan laughing with friends in the graduating class. He wore a crisp blazer over his broad shoulders, his military posture impossible to hide even in civilian clothes. But beneath the cheerful chaos, a current of tension began to ripple. The two security guards, whose badges gleamed beneath the bright overhead lights, had been pacing the perimeter since the doors opened. At first, Marcus barely noticed them. Years in uniform had trained him to tune out routine patrols. Yet something in their body language felt different. They weren't scanning the crowd, they were circling it. Each pass brought them closer to where Marcus sat alone, his program neatly folded on his lap. Nearby families sensed it too. A mother in the next row gave a fleeting glance at Marcus, then at the guards, her brow furrowing with confusion. A father 2 seats away subtly shifted, as though preparing to intervene but unsure why. The murmur of pre-ceremony chatter softened whenever the guards approached, then swelled nervously when they moved on. Marcus noticed every detail, the clipped pace of their steps, the synchronized way they communicated with nothing more than a nod. Years of combat discipline kept his face neutral, but inside, a storm gathered. His instincts, sharpened in war zones, told him this wasn't random. Something about his presence had drawn their focus. He replayed every possibility. A mistaken identity? A misplaced ticket? Nothing fit. He had shown his pass at the door like everyone else. He wasn't breaking any rules. Yet each time the guards reappeared, their eyes locked on him with unsettling precision. Marcus straightened his back, a habit as natural as breathing. He would not shrink in the face of suspicion. Not here. Not today. As the principal's voice crackled through the speakers, calling families to take their seats, the guards made their slow, inevitable approach, like a storm cloud creeping across a summer sky, determined to darken a day that was supposed to shine. The ceremony opened with a burst of applause as the school band struck its first triumphant note. Proud parents leaned forward, phones poised to capture the procession of graduates filing into the hall. But for Marcus Hale, the music felt distant, muffled beneath the low thrum of approaching trouble. The two guards moved with a precision that reminded him of a patrol, measured, deliberate, and unmistakably focused. They stopped 3 rows back, exchanging a brief glance before closing the final distance. The taller guard leaned in first, his shadow spilling across Marcus's lap like an unwanted claim. His voice, pitched barely above a whisper, carried the unmistakable edge of authority. Marcus heard the words, "Sir, we need you to step outside," though the guard's tone left no room for discussion. Around them, families stiffened. Programs rustled like dry leaves in a sudden wind. A grandmother across the aisle lowered her camera, frowning at the spectacle of a decorated Marine being singled out without cause. Marcus met the guard's gaze, calm but unyielding. He asked a simple question, "Why?" But the guard's tight-lipped response offered nothing. "Procedure," he said, as if the word itself were law. Marcus's mind raced. Years of service had conditioned him to comply with protocol, to respect order. But this wasn't a battlefield or a base. This was his son's graduation, a day he had earned through years of sacrifice. He thought of Jordan, still backstage, unaware that his father's presence in the audience was suddenly being treated as a problem to be removed. The second guard stepped closer, his stance widening in a quiet show of force. "We need to talk outside," he repeated, his eyes flicking briefly to the audience, aware of the growing attention. Marcus could feel the weight of dozens of silent witnesses pressing in, their curiosity mingling with unease. He caught snippets of hushed speculation. What's happening? Did he do something? Each whisper a tiny cut against his dignity. Memories of past indignities flashed unbidden. The suspicious stares at airports, the extra screenings, the subtle but sharp reminders that even a uniform decorated with medals could not shield a black man from suspicion. He had faced insurgents overseas, but nothing stung like the quiet, everyday battles on home soil. The principal's voice droned on from the podium, announcing scholarships and honors, oblivious to the tension unfolding in the crowd. Marcus inhaled deeply, summoning the discipline drilled into him during boot camp. His instinct screamed to stand, to challenge the injustice, but another voice urged restraint. Any sudden move could be misread, escalated. "Sir," the first guard pressed, a hint of impatience creeping in. "Now." Marcus rose slowly, every muscle coiled yet controlled. The audience watched, a sea of anxious eyes tracking his every step. The guards flanked him as he moved toward the aisle, their posture betraying the confidence of men who believed their authority was unquestionable. He walked with the same steady stride that had carried him through combat zones, refusing to show fear or anger. Inside, however, his heart pounded, not from danger, but from the humiliation of being treated as a threat in a place meant for celebration. Each step toward the exit felt like a verdict, a silent message that his presence was unwelcome. Near the doorway, Marcus paused. Through the open auditorium doors, sunlight streamed across the polished hallway floor, a stark contrast to the tightening gloom inside. He turned slightly, catching a final glimpse of the stage where his son would soon appear. Jordan's future shimmered in that light, but so did the ugly reality Marcus had fought his whole life to protect him from. Then, a sudden shift broke the tension. From the far corner of the hall, 6 figures rose in near unison. Their movements were quiet but commanding, men with the unmistakable bearing of warriors. Broad-shouldered, sharp-eyed, their presence cut through the murmur like a blade. Dressed in civilian clothes but moving with military precision, they were instantly recognizable to anyone who knew the posture of combat-trained soldiers. The Navy SEALs. Marcus registered them in an instant, a flicker of surprise flashing across his face. He had met some of these men before, during joint operations in the Middle East, brothers in arms forged in the crucible of war. Now, here they were, scattered among the audience like silent sentinels, standing not as soldiers on a mission but as witnesses refusing to remain seated. The lead SEAL stepped into the aisle, his eyes locked on the guards with a calm intensity that carried more weight than any shouted command. One by one, the others followed, their presence radiating quiet defiance. The crowd seemed to hold its breath, the school band faltering mid-note as the tension reached a knife's edge. The guards hesitated, their confidence wavering under the collective stare of men trained to confront far greater threats than a graduation hall dispute. In that charged silence, the balance of power shifted, not with violence, but with the sheer, immovable force of solidarity. The auditorium seemed to freeze in a single, suspended heartbeat. The hum of chatter collapsed into silence so absolute that even the creak of wooden seats sounded like a gunshot. 6 men, calm, deliberate, unmistakably lethal in their quiet authority, now stood between Marcus and the 2 security guards. They did not shout. They did not posture. They simply existed with a presence so commanding it rendered every other movement insignificant. The lead SEAL, a broad-shouldered veteran with weathered features and eyes like tempered steel, took one measured step forward. He carried no badge, no weapon, yet his very posture broadcast decades of discipline and danger. His gaze locked on the taller guard with an intensity that made the man falter, his earlier confidence slipping like sand through his fingers. Marcus remained still, his marine instincts warring with a father's raw emotion. He knew these men, if not by name, then by the unspoken language of service. He recognized the subtle tilt of their chins, the squared shoulders, the quiet breathing of men trained to measure every second before action. They were not here for spectacle. They were here to draw a line. The taller guard cleared his throat, the sound thin and brittle in the heavy air. "This is a private matter," he said, though his voice betrayed the tremor of a man suddenly aware of an audience far larger than he anticipated. The words were meant for the SEALs, but the room absorbed them like a challenge. Parents craned their necks, students turned in their seats, and the principal's voice from the podium stuttered into silence. The lead SEAL did not flinch. He took another step, his boots clicking softly on the polished floor. The sound was quiet but unmistakable, each step a silent indictment. Behind him, the other 5 SEALs shifted subtly, their alignment tightening with the ease of men accustomed to moving as a unit. It was not aggression, it was a statement. "Explain it," the SEAL said finally, his voice low, steady, and devastatingly clear. He did not bark like a drill sergeant. He spoke like a man who had seen the worst of the world and would tolerate no injustice in his presence. The single sentence carried more authority than any shouted order. The guards exchanged a frantic glance. Their rehearsed calm unraveled under the weight of so many eyes, under the quiet but unmistakable threat of men who had navigated war zones and returned with their humanity intact. One guard opened his mouth, closed it again, then managed a weak explanation about crowd control and protocol. But the words rang hollow, their emptiness exposed by the glaring truth that Marcus Hale had done nothing but sit and wait for his son. From somewhere in the crowd, a slow ripple of murmurs began. Parents, teachers, students whispering their disbelief. The atmosphere shifted, a collective awareness hardening into outrage. What had begun as isolated humiliation was now a shared indictment of injustice. Marcus felt the weight of his own restraint. Every fiber of his body urged him to speak, to call out the prejudice that had followed him from foreign battlefields to a quiet American school. Yet he also felt the silent strength surrounding him, the SEALs standing like sentinels, the audience awakening to the truth unfolding before their eyes. He realized he didn't need to shout. His dignity, their presence, and the undeniable injustice spoke louder than any words. The lead SEAL leaned slightly forward, his voice sharpening without raising in volume. "You will let this Marine watch his son graduate," he said, each syllable deliberate, like a verdict delivered from a higher court. The command landed like a gavel strike. The guards stiffened, their faces flushing beneath the unforgiving lights. Whatever authority they thought they possessed had evaporated. They were men in uniforms confronted not by violence but by a moral force they could neither intimidate nor ignore. After a long, suffocating pause, the taller guard stepped back. His partner followed, their retreat silent but absolute. The SEALs did not celebrate. They simply held their ground until the threat had fully dissolved, then gave Marcus a small, almost imperceptible nod, a warrior's acknowledgment of shared respect. Marcus exhaled, the breath he hadn't realized he was holding releasing like a flood. He turned slowly, scanning the room that now watched not with suspicion but with a deep, awakening recognition. Parents lowered their cameras in shame. Teachers stood a little taller. Even the students, still in their gowns and caps, seemed to understand that they had witnessed something larger than a single confrontation. The principal, shaken but resolute, cleared her throat and addressed the crowd. Her voice trembled at first but grew steadier with each word as she thanked everyone for their patience and announced that the ceremony would continue. Applause erupted, not the polite clapping of routine celebration, but the thunderous release of a community refusing to remain silent. Marcus returned to his seat with measured steps, his composure intact though his heart still raced. The seals melted back into the crowd as quietly as they had risen, their mission complete without a single act of aggression. They had not come to fight. They had come to bear witness, to ensure that justice, however small, however fleeting, prevailed in that room. As Marcus sat down, the stage lights brightened, and the graduates began to march. His eyes found Jordan, who scanned the audience until he spotted his father. Their eyes locked, a silent exchange passing between them. Pride, pain, and an unspoken promise that the fight for dignity was far from over, but never fought alone. The rest of the ceremony unfolded beneath a different kind of light. The music resumed, but its notes now carried a quiet gravity, echoing the lesson that had just been carved into the walls of the auditorium. When Jordan's name was called, Marcus rose with the rest of the crowd, his applause steady and deliberate. His son crossed the stage with shoulders squared, his diploma clutched like a banner of hard-won pride. He smiled when he spotted his father in the audience, an expression that held both triumph and understanding. Marcus remained standing as Jordan exited the stage, the roar of the audience swelling around them. The seals, now scattered again among the rows, watched with small, knowing smiles. They had stepped in not for recognition but for principle, a silent vow that no man who had risked his life for the country would be disrespected in its schools. Their presence required no medals, no introductions. It was enough that the guards, and everyone else, had seen what solidarity looked like. When the ceremony ended and families spilled into the bright afternoon, Marcus walked through the crowd with quiet dignity. Parents offered nods of respect. Strangers clasped his hand, their gratitude unspoken but unmistakable. Even the guards kept their distance, their earlier authority dissolved into uneasy silence. Outside, Jordan wrapped his arms around his father in a fierce embrace. Neither spoke of the incident directly. They didn't need to. The day's victory wasn't in the confrontation itself, but in the proof that dignity, courage, and unity could disarm prejudice without a single raised voice. As the crowd thinned, Marcus looked back at the school doors where the confrontation had unfolded. The memory of those 6 seals standing shoulder to shoulder would remain long after the applause faded, a living reminder that strength is not always about force, but about the courage to stand when silence is easier. In a world too often divided by fear and ignorance, their quiet defiance asked a question that lingered like a challenge in the cooling evening air. When injustice walks into the room, will you stay seated, or will you stand?